Good evening. We're jumping back to horror. Welcome to the HolmFront. Good evening. I am Tyler, your host. It's been a while. So I'm coming off real rusty.
You're doing great.
To my right, as always, it's my overly artistic friend, Mitch. Mitch, welcome.
Hello.
Thank you for joining me. We just watched a movie the other day. Actually, before we can start, you have just finished your season 2 of Oscarinas, correct?
I did. It's all done now, so the winners have been announced, and you can go check it out on the show. And
The official Oscarinas YouTube page.
Yep.
Season 2.
No spoilers. Missed one.
Missed one. Way to spoil. Yeah, speaking of spoilers, we're going to be heavy spoilers today with this movie because there's no other way to talk about it than
None
to
at
spoil
all.
the thing.
Yeah, so
we tried. It didn't work out. So,
yeah. So if you were hoping like, ooh, an episode I could just sit back and enjoy without seeing the movie,
see the movie.
You want to go see the movie.
You
and
wanna
I
see
think
the movie.
we want to preface that first that we both liked it, and regardless of anything else that's said after the words, it's worth seeing, so go watch it. If you could still catch it in theaters, I would strongly recommend it.
And at this point, they're like, what the hell? Well, now you've seen the thumbnail by this point. So what did we see?
We saw Heretic.
We saw Heretic.
With Hugh Grant.
Yep, the A24 film that just came out.
Had a pretty cool trailer. It was pretty intriguing premise. It's two Mormon girls go to proselytize, I guess.
Yep.
That's what they call it, yeah. And
I think that's how you say it.
yeah.
I'm not going to look that up.
And the person they encounter, Mr. Reed, is played by Hugh Grant, is a cunning, devious character, and the story unravels from there. And he ends up trapping them in his house. You find that out pretty early on in the
and way to spoil the movie.
Yeah, because I mean they're trapped from the very beginning and they don't even realize it is
right.
kind of the thing. And then he gets into all these like religious philosophical arguments with them as part of like his sinister, your horror villain.
Right. Yeah, you're a stereotypical creepy character, which he doesn't play very stereotypical, which is the great thing about the film.
Well, yeah, Hugh Grants it up, and it's awesome.
A lot of charm. So I guess that was the first thing is welcome back, Mr. Grant. We did see him recently in the Dungeons and Dragons film.
We did, which is something a movie we should do.
We should do, because that was a great movie. Spoilers. So this was a film. He's typically like very rom-com-esque, at least from what I've seen him in.
Yeah, that's his history. Yeah. But I mean, he pulled his weight in this movie. Like the movie succeeds because of him, honestly.
Fair. It does have some good themes, but he definitely brought it home.
Yeah.
He's kind of like Willem Dafoe in the Spider-Man No Way Home.
Yeah.
Like,
the movie just like its value just exponentially goes up as he's on screen.
Yep.
The longer he's on screen, like
the higher the value. Because when he goes off, you're like, no, bring him back in here. We're not here for Spider-Man. We're here for Green Goblin.
He came across as so like, I mean, apart from like the horror things of like his actions, but like the things he says in the conversation points, so believable.
Yeah,
I was like,
definitely.
I could see someone totally feeling this way and thinking these things, and kind of manipulating the situation a little bit.
Yeah, it's interesting because even though you're going into it knowing it's a horror movie, even you're kind of drawn in.
Yeah,
you're like, okay, this seems like it's a different conversation. You can tell it's not quite as what it appears to be on the surface, but it's also interesting enough to continue because they're in there. And have you ever spoken to a Mormon? Like, have you ever had them in the house? And okay, so it's very
not extensively, but a little bit, yeah.
So it's very standardized, right? They have, I mean, it's almost kind of scripted, and then when they get into a situation where they don't know how to answer a question or whatever, they're like, oh, we'll get with our bishop or whatever it is that they call them, and we'll get back to you with those questions. And so they usually get your number, and then they have someone reach out to you, or they'll come to you a certain number of times to like have these conversations, and they might even bring someone more experienced if they recognize that you're interested and that you have a lot of deeper questions and they may be willing. So they had all of that stuff going on. But Hugh Grant kind of directs the conversation in ways that doesn't make them feel like they have to leave immediately.
Yeah.
Like they can handle it. But that's plays into the premise of the film later.
Yeah.
Which we'll get into, obviously.
Well, yeah, so like let's kind of break down the first act maybe a little bit, because you're talking about this. The intro is this conversation that he's having with them when they first enter his house, and it's a really long conversation. I mean, they just carried that scene.
They made sure to like really play that all the way out.
Yeah,
like, you get everything you want from that conversation, which is its strongest point, arguably. And we looked at a bunch of the reviews, and a bunch of people agreed that all of that part was the strongest part of the film. Now, our disagreement comes with the fact that the later parts of the film aren't as strong, which I disagree. I think there was plenty there to work with, even though this may have been I wouldn't say peak, but it definitely is the strongest portion. It is the the hook is really well done.
Even though it's not a Rotten Tomatoes episode, I do want to hear your defense for the audiences on this, because I'm with critics. Me? Critics are like 91%. That's where I'm at with it, and
the audience, your audience like 77.
77. I think that's like average territory, and I don't think this is an average.
Where would that
movie.
land? Like a 3-star?
Yeah, that's like 3-star, I think.
Okay.
And I don't know. It's at least 4. I could see not going 5, but it's at least 4. Solid 4.
That's fair.
None of this 3.5 crap.
You're going to manipulate me into defending that? Whatever. We'll get into that later. Okay, so the beginning of the film starts with an interesting conversation, which almost had me rolling my eyes.
Oh, you want to back up to the very opening?
We might as well.
Okay, you're right.
So like we put in
for
some of that stuff. I figured, they established these two characters, which are Barnes and Paxton, which I never remember characters' names, so I had to look them up.
Sister Barnes and Sister Paxton.
My bad.
Yes.
Sister Barnes, Sister Paxton. So they started off, and this is what kind of clued me in immediately, is that Paxton is speaking first, and she's the one introducing these concepts, and Barnes. And this is a testament to the acting of the film. They do a really great job of establishing.
Yeah, both actresses were great too. I mean, Hugh Grant was just.
He unfortunately.
Well, nobody was going to outshine Hugh Grant.
Fair enough.
But both female characters,
they did a chance. So
they did great too.
Paxton is like the devoted. She cannot get out of the script character. Like she doesn't seem to have a lot of free agency.
Yeah,
she's just very like devoted and almost. To an extent, like brainwashed. Like she doesn't have a lot of scope outside of what she is trying to teach.
Yeah.
And so the beginning conversation is about, she's talking about, so Mormons have this belief that they have a burning in the bosom that kind of like not accentuates it, solidifies their faith, right? It's very feelings based.
Okay.
And so when they read the Book of Mormon, and then they have all these beliefs about Joseph Smith, and then they eventually come to this realization that they like are backing it up with this feeling. So feelings are a very key quintessential portion of this faith. So she's talking about her moment of this feeling that she gets, and apparently it's when she's watching this pornographic film, and she notices that one of the actresses kind of realizes that this situation's pretty crappy. And she's like, kind of the realization that there should be more, but I'm giving into this thing because of, all these circumstances that surround it.
Yeah.
And she identifies with this character and the look on the face.
Yeah.
And so the only thing that the other character gets out of this is that this like seemingly straight-edged Mormon girl is watching pornography.
Right.
And so she jumps in and is like, do you watch this a lot? And she's like, no. And it's like this kind of awkward moment. But you kind of can tell the characteristics of both characters, because like you get the straight edge thing that this person who kind of like deviated a little bit and then was drawn back into the faith by these deviations.
Yeah.
And then Barnes, who seems like she kind of lives on the edge. Like she's not fully devoted, but she believes that there's something. And so she's kind of following. She's just kind of following the steps. Like she's just kind of going through the motions without having a firm foundation.
Yeah, so she's like, which is weird because she's the one who's like, oh, you're watching porn, huh? And she's the one who's so much more like,
but she seemed interested in it, almost like she was going to add to the conversation. It seemed like she was going to be like, well, I want to talk about my experiences with this too. Like,
like I have some thoughts to share, and it's like, but I don't know how comfortable you are,
Paxton's
even though you shared this
I don't want to talk about pornography. I want to talk about my experience that led me away from pornography.
Right.
And Barnes is like, oh, okay.
This revelation I had.
Right.
Yes, it was in this context, but forget that part.
Right. That's not the part I want to talk about.
But she's kind of innocent, Paxton is. Yeah, so when she's describing like, watching the porn, it's like she almost doesn't register like how, like, I don't know
what that affects.
Yeah,
the effects that has on someone else. Like someone like Barnes.
Yeah, like she knows that it's like a taboo thing to be talking about,
She
but at
knows
the
it's
same
wrong.
Yeah, but at the same
in her
time,
mind, it's like, well, this is what got me here. So
yeah,
this is
so
a
I
good
had to
thing.
give you the context, otherwise it's not going to make sense to you.
And everyone else is like, this doesn't seem like a girl that would be watching this, but okay, sure, all right, well, yeah,
Right.
whatever.
Yeah, but that did deepen her character too. I mean,
It did.
So like, I understand like why it was almost eye rolly for you when it started, because it's kind of abrasive. It's really in your face, and she is not. You don't know the character yet, so she's just kind of going off about the things that she was watching, and it just makes her seem kind of shallow, which I would say is not necessarily incorrect about the character.
Right.
Yeah.
I wouldn't disagree with that fact. I think mine was more like, my experience with A24 is it just seems like they throw shock value in for shock value's
Yes,
value.
It did have a little bit of, yeah.
So that's when I was like, are we really starting this way? Like, because that's the start. Like the minute, like even before it fades in, we're talking
Nothing
about
else has
pornography.
happened. It's just like
this isn't what I didn't want to talk about pornography in this film. Like, but then later on within the context of the full film, I forgave it a little bit because it added to the characters. Now
it did,
and it wasn't gratuitous about its content, thankfully. So it's not like it doesn't delve into like this part of the scene. Like it wasn't talking about the
you don't go back and watch Paxton
exactly.
That scene.
It doesn't get real awkward with it. So it's like, okay, I'll move past it. Anyway,
and it did bring up the topic of control, which is a hugely important theme for the film too, and about like free will and agency, because it's like, I mean, I don't want to over-explain, but like part of like Paxton's revelation is that the actress in the thing that she was shooting has this like moment of awareness of like how much this whole situation is like controlling her, but then she's and that awareness like sets her apart from it or something like that. And that's
it was the fact that she realized that there should have been something more. This is what she was, contributing to the world essentially.
This
destructive
like
thing,
right?
And so the realization that there's a soul, and so Paxton read that off of her face, and that's what like solidified her faith. Anyway,
which is obviously her projecting, but it did say a lot about her as a character.
Yeah, so I mean, it might have been something that she interpreted, but again, we didn't get to see that part, which I'm okay with. I didn't want to.
Why not?
Yeah, okay. Anyway, so moving on from that.
Okay,
unless there's something else you wanted to.
No, that's perfect.
Okay.
And then they start going around and they're trying to, minister to people, and everybody's giving them the cold shoulder. They're being really mean to them. I don't think it ever established where this took place. Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, it seems somewhere kind of like Midwestern, or I don't know, like Seattle, or it kind of had that vibe. Whereas, anyway,
or maybe
it was very, very pretty. not a.
Yeah, it was pretty.
Didn't seem like a California location. California's pretty, but not in the way that this film is showing. Everything's very green, like
lush. It's rainy, stormy.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Looked like it was probably getting a real winter. So they go through their list of people. And then they end up going to this house. So when anyone
Mr.
expresses
Reed.
interest, they get the information, and then they have the addresses and stuff. And so Mr. Reed is one of the houses that they go to, and they knock on the door. So this begins the actual portion of the film that leads to the crescendo.
Yeah.
First bit of it is just the establishing Barnes and Paxton as characters.
Mm-hmm.
So, excuse me. From there, you get to meet Hugh Grant, who does an excellent job from start to finish. Just the minute he shows up on screen to the end, he holds your attention extremely well.
He knows that character in and out.
He was having a blast.
He was just all over. He was like, "Oh, I know this character."
Right.
I can't imagine the director having to tell him anything. He was just like, "No, I know."
He's like on set with the girls, and Hugh Grant's like, "Is there anything you need me to do?" He's like, "No. Anyway, you two."
Yeah, he did like a little guidance.
Just do your thing, Hugh. You're good. You're fine.
It felt like he did take some time. Like, I don't know what he did to prep for the role, but it like literally could have been a ton of things, or it could have been nothing, and I wouldn't know the difference.
That's
because he was just so like convinced of the things that his character was convinced of.
Right.
And he had determined that those were the reasons, and every step he takes to create the situation the way that he wants it is just so
very
like
intentional.
Yeah, so intentional, which just made it fascinating. And so, okay, so part of what makes that so dynamic work so well is that in their conversation, they're talking about religion, And he's like, oh, I have some problems with religion. I'd kind of like some answers maybe you guys can help me with. And then he asks them. And, it's like he goes like way off to the deep end. It's not like, so what's the meaning of life? He's like, asking for things like, oh, well, like Joseph Smith was a polygamist. And that's like a, hugely problematic thing. And he's like, how do we reconcile that? And like, they're like, ooh, okay, how do we answer this question?
Yeah. Well, the interesting thing about that conversation is that he leads around just kind of the generic questions that most of these people probably get.
Yeah.
And then he sets it up. He does this purposely, and he does this throughout the film. He goes in and he's like, I'm going to ask an icky question. And so it sets you on edge because you're not really sure what he's going to ask. But you know it's going to be something that everyone's going to be uncomfortable with.
And he's like, could I do that? Are you going to be okay with that? And they're like, well, we don't know what the question is, so it's hard to answer. Right. And so it's just like this.
He's like, okay. And he does a very charming role. And so one of the things, too, that's kind of led into this, so they do an excellent job. And this is one of the things I liked about this film was the buildup was really well done.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that is established is that they're like, hey, you have to have your wife home. Your wife has to be present in order for us to be in here. And he's like, okay, sure, I'll go let her know. And then he comes back out and he's like, she's not feeling particularly up to being in here right now.
Yeah.
She's making pie. She'll be out in a minute. Yeah. And so he establishes something that could be true.
Right.
But everyone kind of feels like it's not.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting because that plays the whole movie and has a payoff. It's not just a bit of information to keep you, I don't know, invested. It's something that he uses intentionally. And I thought that was fascinating because every little bit of information that they give you is intentional and builds. And so when they sit down, they're kind of looking for the wife and they kind of feel like she's in the house because they can smell the pie, but she's not in the room. And so you're kind of left with this question, is she there or is she not? Was this true or was this not? And he's playing it off like, we all know that this isn't true, but you're staying anyway.
Right.
Because you have a job, you want to proselytize. I'm probably saying that wrong.
Proselytize.
You want to evangelize.
Evangelize. Yeah, it's easier.
You want to share your faith and you want to have this conversation, but at the same time, like you feel like this isn't true. And in some level, it's not, but you're going to stay anyway. So anyway, that plays into the general theme of the film.
Yeah,
because they have this conversation. So he goes through this and then he's like, I'm going to drop this conversation, this topic that's very uncomfortable.
Right.
What do you feel about polygamy? Which is an uncomfortable topic for Mormons because Joseph Smith did engage in polygamy, and that's an uncomfortable topic. And most of the time, they will deviate from that because to them, it's not important. What's important is the aspects of the faith as they regard them, rather than the character of this prophet and what may or may not have been shady.
Yeah.
And so they do where they're kind of like, well, it's something that's kind of like acknowledged, but at the same time, we don't quite and condone it, etc. And then he switches it. So he jumps that, and then he jumps into, I don't know, it was like, what's your favorite type of pie or something?
Well, yeah. It's like what's your favorite?
Off.
What's your favorite fast food restaurant or whatever? And so they're comparing fast food or whatever. And at first it was weird because he does that like repeatedly in this conversation. I was like, why are we talking about this? That's like that other part of the conversation was so
fast food.
Yeah. And it's like this was an engaging topic. This other one is just totally frivolous and dumb. Right. But then at some point, and I remember the polygamy fast food one the most because that was like the third time it happened. And that's the point at which I caught on, which I know is very slow. I'm very naive when I'm in a movie. But at that point, I was like, oh, that's interesting. He's trying to get them to relax and let their guard down. He knows he asked, like he pushed a button.
Well, and then he raises the guard. That was what was interesting because he would raise them, their shields, and then he would slap them away.
Yeah.
And then they would be like, oh, we're talking about fast food. We're okay now. And he kept doing it on purpose. And like, it's very interesting because you knew that was happening, but it also felt very organic.
Yeah.
Because he has this like, I don't know, this kind of elderly gentleman, very kind air about him, this like charm. And so it's okay. It's right. It's all right. This isn't dangerous.
Right.
But then, he leads into the further part of the film. And so, yeah, all that buildup was extremely well done, extremely well shot, extremely well acted. Hugh Grant does an excellent job of really providing that air of someone who's really well thought out, but also manipulative, but also charming, to where you're really not sure which way it's going to go.
Yeah.
Anyway, that was my point on the buildup. I know I kind of dominated that conversation. Sorry.
No, I mean, that's brilliant. I mean, I think you unpacked it so well. The other aspect of of the scene is that you're just like, you've got three characters sitting down talking to each other.
Yeah.
And, I'm always critical of this now because it's like once I've had it shown to me that so many movies and especially TV shows do that, where it's just characters talking back and forth, shot over the shoulder, shot over the shoulder, shot. Now I cannot unsee it. And so now every time that happens, I'm like, this is just so boring. It's not visually stimulating. And I want there to be something happening. This one, I don't know if it like passed the rule or not, other than the fact that I didn't notice because I was just so engaged in the conversation.
It was an engaging conversation. I think it was well shot, but that's a good point. I don't know.
I think for the most part it was, because it did have a lot of sequences like where it would do like, it had a lot of close-ups. It was like a movie of close-ups. A ton of very, very like in-your-face close-ups.
Kind of like this weird upward angle that's like real up in the face.
Yeah, or like watch like someone's bead of sweat or something like that. It had quite a few number of those. And that kind of can sometimes come across as like trying too hard to get an emotion out of you. If I just put you closer to it, then it's more intensified, which is true.
It's very classic style too.
It kind of, yeah. But then also, well, actually, what do you mean by classic?
Well, it seems like reminiscent of very old films. Like it's very, when they would scream or something, they'd be like right up in the face.
Yeah. Like
that's what it always reminds me of.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if that's what they're trying to do, but that's what it feels like.
That's fair. Yeah, I mean, to their credit, though, it's like when you're working with such a small space and not a lot of actors, like your options become limited very quickly.
True.
And I felt like they did a great job because, like, at one point he has to go and like check on the pie and then come back.
Which that was always interesting too, because they do that very intentionally, where he'll get up and he's always jovial. He's like, "I'll go check on the pie," and then he'll like walk out, and it's dark beyond the door.
It's just like pitch dark down that hallway.
Black, and he like fades into the blackness and the door shuts behind him. And it's always this kind of like ominous music, and they're just watching for the entire, until he's gone. They like hold the camera there, and then they go back to the two girls, and they're kind of like, this is odd, but whatever. He's going to get his wife, so you kind of just like push it aside. But it's interesting like, details like that where they're kind of like, something's wrong, but it could be okay.
Yeah,
and because they're like, well, we got to talk, and it's raining outside. We have to leave soon, and his wife really should be in here, and I want pie, and it smells good in here.
I want pie,
but like at the same time, we got to speed this up a little bit. So the discomfort just kind of rises that way because he leaves like 3 times.
Yeah, or he gets up and gets the book out of the shelf or whatever. So so they do a great job, and like so I'm giving it a pass on like the close-ups and the people talking back and forth because there's not a lot in the room, and I felt like for what they did have, they actually used pretty much everything.
Yeah,
I don't know that I would have really shot it any differently. I don't know how I could have without it making, because you don't want it to seem contrived, like someone's got to get up and move around and do something all the time. Like that will be noticeable too. So it has to feel organic for the scene, and the combination of all those elements just made for a really great scene that's like makes the movie worth watching just for that scene alone. It's so fantastic.
And it was a great their transition was great too, because he leaves, he blows out the candle and leaves, and the way that they figure out that something's actually wrong is that Barnes turns around the candle and realizes that it is a blueberry pie scented candle.
Yeah.
So now you're faced with the question, is there actually pie being made? And if that's the case, like, if it's not being made, is there an actual wife here? Which is what we've been asking for since we got here.
I love how you're like, but is there still pie?
Right. There could be. But the thing is, that's the interesting thing about human nature, right? Is that you want to believe the good thing. You want to believe you're not in danger because you're in this guy's house. You have no idea if there's a way out.
Yeah.
But you do know that this is fishy. So now what do I do?
Because he said there would be real pie.
Right.
But that's not real pie. That's a pie-scented can.
Yeah. Why is it pie-scented if this is like, so now, and that's, again, plays into the theme. Like, he does these things purposely in order to get you to be like, how much are you trying to convince yourself? How much truth are you putting into your own head rather than acknowledging what a reality is facing you?
Yeah.
And it gives you that much information at the beginning, and it's really interesting because of that. Because you, like, as an audience member, know. But I mean, I'm watching a horror movie, so I know the answers to these questions. But like, if I were in the situation, would I be telling myself the same things? And it's interesting because it gives you those thought-provoking questions. You're like, well, if I were here, as this 20-year-old girl in this guy's house, and this information was revealed to me, would I tell myself the same thing? Would I be like convincing myself that I'm safe?
I would have dished right at that moment.
Fair.
I'd have been like,
I gotta go.
No, that's fishy as heck. I would just straight up leave. I'd be like, he could think I'm a weird Mormon.
Yeah.
I don't care.
Bye. Yeah, that's fair. Which I tried to do.
Because it's like, if it's the scented candle, I'm like, I mean, I guess like in a real life context, I don't know what I would actually do.
Right,
because it would feel differently.
Yeah,
but I just
you
feel
don't
like,
know that you're in a horror movie. So,
but it's like I'm smelling the pie, and he mentioned that it was being baked, but I haven't seen her yet. And we've asked repeatedly to see her, and we still haven't. And then now that I see the candle, it's like, oh, he like lied. That's what I took from that. I was like, he just straight up lied. He said there was real pie. That's not real pie. He was lying about this. And I mean, to be fair,
that's what I would take offense to. Where's the pie, man? Where's my pie? Where's the real pie?
How about that pie?
How about that pie? That is an interesting anecdote. I'm gonna jump into a side because when we were in high school, I had this friend. His name was DJ, and we were at my house, and we had like cherry and apple, and
because it was like a graduation thing or something.
Was it? I can't remember. Whatever.
It was some big event.
We'd have a bunch of people
outside
at my house
talking, chilling, shooting the breeze, and
there's
mom
pie
inside.
That there's pie,
right?
And DJ could not let this go. Like
No.
we were all hanging out, having a good conversation, had a good time. And DJ did not want to release the fact that there's pie inside. Why are we still talking? And so we're like having this conversation. He's like, so there's pie, guys. And we're like, yeah, all right. And then we keep going. We're like, we're going to get to the pie eventually. And he's like, yeah, okay, but
right.
How about that pie, though?
Because we would just keep talking. We're sharing stories.
And he's getting upset.
And he's like, but he wouldn't show any of that. He was just like laughing and nodding along. And then at some point, like, we'd be like, how about that pie? Just slip it right in there.
Like, wait a minute. That's what this movie felt like. It's like he blows out the candle and then he leaves. And you're like, all right, sweet, pie time.
All right.
He's coming back.
Let's get the pie.
And he comes back, no pie. It's like, come on. I wanted the pie. About that pie.
Yeah.
Anyway.
But you know, what's interesting about that whole scenario that you bring up is he could have just actually made pie for them. He knew they were coming.
Right.
They were on a schedule. So he could have just prepared
the pie
actual
does show up later.
It does. But like,
it does show up.
You know, I'm just saying, like, he could have he chooses to like you said, it's intentional on his part. It's because it wouldn't add up with his character if he just gave them pie, because then he's deliberately tricking them and luring them in with something that's true. And he doesn't want to do that. He wants to lure them in with something that is fake and that they know is fake.
Sure.
That's the part that is so interesting to him as a character, is he's like, you already know. So I'm going to present it in that way.
Yeah. There's a movie, I can't remember what this was. But there was it's a serial killer-esque film, and the main character, which I can't remember, they were like a detective or something. I'll have to look this up later. But basically, the end of the film, she goes to this house and she knocks on the door and he answers and he invites her in.
Okay.
And she knows that he's a killer.
Oh yeah, are you talking about the girl with the dragon tattoo?
Is that what it is?
Yeah, well that happens with Daniel Craig.
It's interesting what people will do
for politeness sake.
Yeah, for fear of not being seen as polite.
Yeah, exactly.
Because that's what he does. He's like, you didn't have to come inside.
And he's like, and you knew I was dangerous.
I was a killer.
Yeah, you had already figured it out at that point. Yeah, because so that's that memorable scene in that movie where he's like investigating, but like he knows he just doesn't have.
There's a couple of memorable scenes in that movie, but
but yeah, he's like, you know, oh, like, what are you doing out here outside? Kind of act suspicious a little bit.
Oh, yeah,
like,
they're like sneaking around or something.
Yeah, because he's sneaking around because he knows. And then, you know, the villain character invites me. He's like, why don't you come inside and have a drink or whatever? And then he's like, I wouldn't want to intrude. He's like, it's no trouble. Don't worry about it. And, you know, Daniel Craig should have just said no and ditched. And he doesn't, like a total wuss. And he goes in there to be polite. And then he gets drugged and strung up and nearly killed.
Right.
Or maybe he does get killed. You go see the movie. But yeah, it's
who
like
knows?
That was, I mean, well, I just like that was the most profound thing that movie said, I feel like.
That's fair.
Because I don't know,
that's something that stuck out to me was that yeah. Well, it's interesting what people will do for fear of being seen as not polite.
Right.
And that kind of had similar vibes with this film, was that, you know, like they're too focused on being polite rather than just acknowledging the red flags that are just slapping them in their face at that point.
Right.
So anyway, he goes out and he invites them to come into the hallway with him.
Yeah.
Oh, to come meet his wife. Come meet my wife.
Yeah, something like that.
And it's like, this isn't giving it away. Like, we're going to go into the dark. to go meet the wife. Like, yeah, promise, she's in the basement.
Right.
Come
So
on.
they do try, like, they're not dumb characters either, because they do try to just leave.
They
determine they're like, this is too freaky, so they try to leave, and the door is locked, and it's like, but like bolted. It's like there's some mechanism.
Yeah.
And the thing is, he tells them about that too. When they're coming inside, he's like, "Oh, my house has like metal in the walls. Is that okay?" And they're like, "That's a weird comment. I guess I don't care." Not realizing that means that they
no
can't.
Phone signal can
yeah,
go
no
out.
phone signal is going to be able to go out. So then they're blocked off from that. And then it also means he has like some mechanism rigged up to where it locks the door. So it's kind of like he's given them
all the answers before they come in.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then they try and make a phone call. They realize they can't, so they go down. They're telling him that they got to go because their elders are calling them. And he's like, "Well, I know that's not true because I told you that there's metal in the walls and you can't make a phone call.
Yeah.
So you're lying to me."
Yeah.
And that's kind of when the switch happens. So they go into this room, and it's fashioned like a church.
It's also kind of like a library,
right?
In a weird way.
So he's got an altar, a couple of pews, and then he's got a bunch of books. And then as he like reveals things, he shows that he's got all kinds of paraphernalia and material on religions. Mm-hmm. And he begins to give his spiel, and essentially was saying, "Look how many similarities there are between all these religions. Like, some of them have virgin birth, some of them have a death on a cross, some of them have the death of the Messiah figure, some
resurrection,
of them have the resurrection. He gives all these similarities between multiple religions, and obviously there's a bunch in there.
And his comparison is with the board game Monopoly, which makes a lot of sense because Monopoly, of course, was invented by, I forget her name now, but she invented a game that was basically identical to Monopoly, but it wasn't called that. And then someone else just made the exact same game, almost verbatim, called it Monopoly, and then they're the ones who got all the credit and all the money from it.
Well, the original is not called Monopoly, right? It's called something...
Yeah, it's called something else.
Anyway, so his point was, well, it's everything a counterfeit. There's something beforehand.
Yes.
And this is just derivative.
Right.
And it just uses elements in order to, to manipulate people, essentially.
Yeah.
So he begins giving his spiel on, well, religion... Mormonism's not the question, right? That's not the topic of debate. And religion is. What is religion? And what is it used for? And why are there so many of these variations? And how does one determine truth from all this? Which in itself is an interesting question, but they're fairly basic questions when you're going into the topic of religion in general.
Yeah.
And so he's bringing them up, and then Barnes now speaks up as someone who's fairly well versed. Seems like someone who has asked a bunch of these questions.
Yeah.
Whereas Paxton starts to really kind of recoil into herself. She's already feeling pretty uncomfortable because she's unsafe, but she just starts kind of spouting memorized lines. She doesn't really have a way of combating this situation. She just knows what she's supposed to say. She's like, I got to tell him this, this, and this. And Barnes
is the script.
Right. Barnes is recognizing that this guy has already studied a bunch and knows what he's talking about and isn't going to take the recess lines.
Yeah.
He's going to need something deeper.
Right.
So giving him like more... The fact that she's asked these questions before and gone through this process should have a connection, right? So she's trying to go for the more personal angle, whereas Paxton is more of like kind of short-circuiting.
Well, that's right, because they do establish at the beginning, too, that Barnes has converted like 11 people or something like that.
She's been on the mission for a while, and it seems like she hasn't fully accepted herself. She's just kind of going through the motions.
Well, but that's what we read into the character.
That's fair.
Like what Paxton...
But it seems like it's pretty clear.
Because Paxton's like, well, you converted 11 people. I haven't done that.
Right. Like she had just started or something. Like she was pretty, near into the start of her mission. I forget how long they are. They're like
but they're both like 19 is what they're supposed to be or something. Or was Barnes
I think Barnes is a little bit older.
Was she supposed to be a little older?
She's like 20, 21 or something, and then Paxton's like 19.
Still, that's pretty young for, having done that. So, and it's interesting. It's interesting that Barnes, the one who's
I think they all do it directly after high school, if I'm not mistaken. Just from my general knowledge of Mormonism, I think they graduate.
Well, you can...
I think you can choose to do it, yes. But I think for those who have grown up in the church, I think that's like general timeline. Like before college, you go and do that.
Well, Barnes might be a special case because of what's revealed about her later,
Potentially.
but whether or not that happened before or after her conversion. But anyways, the thing that I want to touch upon with that's really interesting is like Barnes is the person who's converting all these people when she herself doesn't really hold the
Right.
belief that strongly, whereas Paxton does seem like she believes it. She doesn't have great reasons. Like, she can't convince herself or
she's
others.
All in, but she's like the idealist, right? Without a whole lot to back it up. Whereas Barnes is someone who has a lot of doubts, but doesn't want to acknowledge or accept the alternative.
Yeah.
And so there's this weird dichotomy between the two that actually plays into the story really well.
Yeah.
And adds a really interesting dynamic between Reed as he comes in, or Mr. Reed, I guess.
Well, yeah, because he says to them, and this was probably my favorite line in the whole movie, is when he says early on, he's like, well, I studied, all these religions. I studied every one of them. And he like goes on this diatribe about how much effort he put into it. And they're just like, whoa, like we've not did anywhere near this much, right?
Right.
And then he says, and at the end of it, he's like, because I was trying to find the one true religion. And unfortunately, I did. And that was like such a creepy revelation, because he's like, unfortunately, like it's too bad, but I did come up with the right answer. And you're like, well, what answer is that? I don't know if I want this.
Right. Yeah, now I'm in doubt.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, then it's interesting. So that's his whole spiel. He like lays it all out. He compares it to the board games. He compares it to the fast food. Mm-hmm. And then he kind of like lays out all the material that he's got on all these religions.
Yeah.
And then he has 2 doors. And he's like, the front door does not open anymore. It has this mechanism inside that cannot be opened again now that it's locked. You've got to continue through to get out. And there's 2 doors. And basically what he says is like, after my spiel, I've either strengthened your faith or I've led you into disbelief. Or at least into enough doubt to call it disbelief.
Right.
So he writes belief and disbelief on each door. He's like, which one do you choose? Like, what are you doubting, or are you more staunch in your faith now that I presented these arguments? And the point of it is that now they recognize that this is a dangerous situation. This man is trying to manipulate this into whatever his means might be. And so Paxton thinks, okay, he's just trying to make me not believe in what I believe now. I'm going to choose the disbelief thing and just get out of here. I don't really, I don't have a stance either way. I just think that this is what he wants me to answer, and I'm going to go.
Yeah, and, it's interesting because she wants to play into the delusion, because she tells Barnes, like, I think we should accept our host's generosity in this moment. Because she's like,
go.
But, it's like, and Barnes is like, it's not generous. I mean, she doesn't say that, but she's like, this guy is like, he's literally going to try to kill us or something. Like, this is bad. Like, and I'm not going to act like I don't know that that's the case in front of him.
Barnes, actually accepts the reality.
Yeah, because
even though she doesn't know what to do with it, she knows, okay, there's something more to this than just trying to make me not believe anymore.
Because she goes on the offensive and is just like, well, I can take down your argument too. And here's the logic of how I would do that. Yeah. And when she presents it, it's like, oof, now we're getting some prickly conflict. But it's cool to see how the 2 characters, like, even in that moment, it's reflective of like where they're at with the strength of how much they hold to their beliefs. Because Paxton's like you said, she's like, well, if I have to abandon it, I guess I have to abandon it. I want to live.
Yeah.
Like, this isn't a tough question.
That's all I care about.
Yeah. And then there's also like, it's these illusory things is what the other 2 characters are telling her.
Right.
And she's
it's not
just
reality.
Like, and she's like, well, what difference does it make? Like, I just want to live.
Whereas Barnes is like, well, if I'm going to go down, I go down fighting. But you presented all these arguments why it's not real. I can present all the arguments why those arguments suck. And so she throws out a pretty good set of reasons. Yeah. And it's just like, well, now the conclusion that I've come to is that it doesn't matter what I think. I'm going to stick with my faith, and I'm going to go to the belief door.
Believe it, so F you, basically. Because she's like, you're saying that these things are all comparable and iterative, and she's like, but some of them are not. Like, some of them are totally different from each other.
Yeah, she says that he left out the differences. You brought up the similarities. You took out the differences, which would remove the reasons as to why some of these things are important.
Right.
And so now you've eliminated the foundation of your argument. And so now I have some... It's fighting power just on an idealistic level. Because she's like, these are your only ideas that I can give you. I still have to go through the door and figure out what the further plans you have are.
Yeah.
And so to me, it's like, well, I'm going to choose my belief at that point because this is all I have.
Mm-hmm.
Like you've tried to break me down, and I don't know where I'm going to go or what this is going to lead to, but at least I can get you on that one. So she's like, I'm going to go to the belief door.
Yeah.
And so she goes through belief and eventually convinces Paxton to go with her.
Which again, Paxton is just like, well, I don't want to be alone. I have a better chance of survival with you.
With you,
So like, why am I going to go by myself? Like, it doesn't matter. I don't have to hold to belief or disbelief.
Exactly.
Which I guess like plays into this interesting like comment about human nature. It's like, you know, because that's the thing. Like, so the movie is about the characters having their beliefs questioned and being challenged.
And what they do with it, yeah.
And what they do with it. Now, obviously, there's a religious subtext, but the religion is not really that relevant for the themes of the movie. It's more about like, because I mean, you could take a lot of this, I think, and apply it to any belief you have.
Yeah, it's not a commentary on Mormonism, like I said. It's not even a commentary on, well, I guess it's commentary on a more pulled back version of religion, which is ended up being the thesis of the film later.
Okay, yeah.
But that ends up becoming like the revelation rather than what you're noticing throughout the movie. I mean, you can kind of pick up on it given the context, but anyway. Yeah, human nature, I think, is more interesting. They play with those themes quite a bit going throughout because they have a lot of commentary on that too.
Well, I'm
with Mr. Reed, Barnes, Paxton, and with the further characters that you see later.
Yeah, well, and I'm just kind of like fascinated by the idea of like, because you know, having your beliefs challenged is always really hard.
Yeah,
and it requires a lot of like practice and skill to be able to take it because it's criticism, and like if something you believe in is determined to be wrong or incorrect in some way, and you have to make that shift, depending on how strongly you held that belief, it's going to rock your world, and not always in the best way in the moment. And so, like for example, sometimes I have to debunk a lot of things when I'm teaching a class, because there's a lot of stuff that's taught in a specific way in undergrades or in undergraduate grades in the U.S. education system, and it's taught that way specifically because it's a way for us to quantify if you know material. But that doesn't mean that you like necessarily like believe in it or like know how to like utilize it properly. It just means you knew how to memorize it to get past this particular quota, right?
Right.
So like actual learning has to do with that deeper interrogation, that critical thought. So like part of what I do as an English teacher, getting into my personal life, I guess a little bit, but like part of my job is to teach critical thinking. So I'm not trying to tell you what to think, but like why. And so I have to walk you through all those steps so that you can start coming to your own conclusions. And students are always, I mean, well, not always, but a lot of them like my class, and they like my class because they come away from it like, oh, okay, yeah, I feel like I can actually engage with this stuff a little better. And you know, that's like I was just trying to say like it's a similar kind of thing that I was watching happening where it was like the two sisters, it's like Barnes had done it on some level, Paxton not so much, but in either case they both need to interrogate those questions a little more.
That's fair.
But there was also a bit of a reflective message because there are a few things about Mr. Reed that are like inconsistent, like he locks them in and then tells them he can't open the door. That's a lie. He can open the door. And he says like, oh, well, I can't open it until morning. So if you want to get out, you're going to have to go through these doors in the back. And I feel like that was more of a lie than like the pie, right? It was a different kind of deception. And I think it kind of hurt his argument a little bit because he's like, well, I need that in order to get what I'm trying to do accomplished. But
fair, but I think it also plays into the fact that I'm now going to give you, because the pie was a lie. And basically,
yeah,
but that's a little one, right?
It is a little one, yeah.
It's an easier one to accept. Whereas telling them I cannot open that door again until morning is a bigger lie. But
yeah,
I think his point with doing that was the fact that like, if you've accepted the little one about the pie, can you accept a bigger one about this door being locked?
Oh, yeah, because they could have pushed back harder on it.
I think that was his point, was like, how much are you willing to accept in order to tell yourself that you're safe?
That adds up because then he starts to go into like even greater and greater lies from that point forward. And some of them are just like crazy huge.
Yeah.
And, you know, the characters are able to disseminate that noise eventually.
Yeah.
You know,
but I think that was playing into him trying to teach them how to think. That's just how I took it.
But
fair. It was more of like, at some point, he's trying to apply it to a larger scale, right?
Right.
When you're in religion, how much of this do you know is false, but you accept anyway?
Right.
And I think that was how he was trying to build that. Because then he goes into more religious themes, because those are, you know, pretty innocuous, non-religious themes, a pie and a door, like who cares?
Yeah.
But then he jumps into the prophet scene and all that. Like,
Yeah.
Again, things you know to be true, but there's enough there to make you think maybe.
Right.
Right. But again, it's what you tell yourself and how you're thinking about it, how you're critically evaluating it. And that's what he's trying to teach them is like, how are you evaluating this? Or are you just accepting what's given to you?
Well, and the way it ends too, not to get into the ending necessarily, but just like his resolution as a character, I felt like was something that, like, I basically came away with it feeling like I was like, he could still be challenged on some of his points even more though.
Definitely.
And I think that was good because it showed that it made him a more human character. And it was also like these questions that you have about your beliefs, like that's why it's like always important to like learn how to go through that process and it's obviously more well, weirdly enough, it's actually more impactful, I think, when you're younger because you're trying to build up like, a foundation and then someone takes it down, oftentimes like a teacher or a pastor or something like that. And then you've got to reconstruct. And part of your, ideology is going to be, or your beliefs are going to come from that person, or at least filtered by it, and then mixed in with your own other inputs. Parents also, it's like there's a number of people who are going to contribute in your life and make that happen. And then at some point, you're okay to have them challenged, but you're also a more grounded person. And so you can kind of do both spheres. But again, just kind of the idea that it was interesting that here was a character who sort of needed to be challenged on a lot of his arguments more, even though he was older and wiser and so experienced. Do you know what I mean?
He was choosing these opponents that weren't quite up to challenge. He was just doing it to people he knew he can manipulate.
Right, which I think is also interesting too, because it's almost like, hey, you're picking a low blow. Like, if you really want to do this, you should have gotten someone who like knows the Mormon book like in and out.
Sure,
or
any given religion, but someone who's well versed and understands inside and out how to actually argue these points rather than just trying, because they're just trying to convert. They're not trying to argue. They're not trying to like have a debate.
Right, because they're not. I mean, that's not really fair to them. Like, they're teenage girls. They're like, well, I don't know. Like, this is as much as I know about it right now. It's working for me, okay. Like, what do you want?
You're not gonna know it inside and out, especially if you just jumped in. Yeah, but you have to start somewhere. Yeah, but in his mind, it's like, well, yes, you do, but at the same time, like this can be used in this way, and therefore it should be just not acknowledged or ignored or avoided. Like I wasn't really sure what he thought the point should be. Yeah, he had just used it for his own gain, which then leads into the point where the rest of the film is them acknowledging that they're trapped and then figuring out how to get out.
Sort of a cat and mouse scenario.
Exactly. And I think the one other notable scene is he brings down a prophet who eats poison pie and dies. Yeah, and he's like, I'm gonna
we need to describe the eating of this pie.
It's the one like overly gratuitous part of the film for sure.
Yeah, it's like
so this girl comes in and
she's just a decrepit skeleton of human flesh, like barely alive. Like you could flick her and she would die.
Yeah, she like kind of wobbles in holding this pie, and she's got this robe on and this hood, and it looks real, I don't know, Oracle-esque. Yeah. And so she sets the pie on the table, and then she goes over and like bends over, and she kind of just folds down and puts her hands behind her back in this weird and you can hear everything's creaking, like
it's like popping and where
it's very gratuitous.
How about that pie?
Exactly. And she wants that pie. Hardcore. So she's this prophet.
Yeah.
And she has like these tattoos and stuff. And so what happens is he goes through her spiel, and then she stands up amidst all the crackling and the skin stretching and whatever else is happening there. And he's like, this is the blueberry pie that we talked about. However, it's laced with poison.
Yeah.
This person's going to eat it and die. And you guys are going to verify this. So she goes up, sits down, and just and like scoops out this. It's like so much. I'm like, oh god, she's eating the pie. Like, why couldn't we use a fork for this? This is so much,
or a spoon at that point.
Whatever. It's just like so much, and so she eats it. And she sits there, and it's like dribbling out, and blood's coming. was like, this is a lot more like horror movie-esque than and then she just like flops over. Dead. Done.
And you're like, all right then.
I kind of saw it coming. I didn't need all of that, but so then he makes the girls go check. They check her pulse.
He's not exaggerating, by the way.
Yeah.
I'm just laughing because that's exactly how it was. Exactly.
It was just so much like how much her body cracks and then it's just the pie sound it's a lot. It's a lot. So she eats and dies. They check the pulse and verify that this person's dead. Now he sets it up to where he knew something would happen in order to divert their attention.
Yeah.
You don't know this at first. You just kind of know that someone knocks on the door and it's an elder. And your attention as an audience member is that, oh, someone's here. They might be able to get out.
Yeah.
So they want to yell and scream. So they run to the door and try and get his attention while he's at the door.
Yeah.
What ends up happening is he switches the bodies. So he switches the dead chick with a live chick who then comes back alive or whatever.
Yeah.
And then that person comes over and gives a prophecy. Like, what did you see on the other side?
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, it was bright lights. And then she says something that kind of leaves you like, you're not sure if it's, part of the prophecy or if it's something else. But she says it's not real.
Yeah.
And so Hugh Grant then comes in and escorts the prophet off stage left.
Yeah.
And then they're left to wonder, was that for us? Was she saying that this isn't real? Or is she saying that the afterlife isn't real?
Yeah.
Because you're in this portion of questioning everything, but you also know he kind of came in pretty abruptly.
Yeah.
So you're wondering if this person was trying to relay a message.
Mm-hmm.
And then Barnes ends up.
Well, so hold on. Because we've gone on for like 50 some odd minutes here. I feel like we've sold this movie.
We have.
Do you want to spoil the rest of it? Or do you kind of feel like, is there anything else essential from the latter half of the movie that you feel is like
fair,
really essential to get across, to discuss? Because I mean, I will say this. I did have a more mixed impression of the film when it ended. I knew I liked it, but I just
wasn't sure how much.
Yeah, I wasn't sure how much. And it was in part because from the trailer, I thought that the second half of it was going to go through the steps of like I thought they would go from room to room to room to room, and and then I thought they would take different doors and they would meet up somewhere.
Full on cat and mouse.
Yeah, full cat and mouse, like Alice in Wonderland status, where like they're just going through these different like chambers.
Were you disappointed that it wasn't?
Oh, I was, absolutely, because I felt like I was just like, wow, there's like more you could do with this. This is such a cool premise. Like he's talking to them and he's staged this whole game. Like he's the puppet master. That's so interesting. And but it's like has this like religious angle. I'm into it, and it doesn't really do that. There was like a couple more rooms, but not really that many. But at the same time, like this has been such a rich conversation. I feel like it just demonstrates that it is a good movie, and you should definitely go and see it. And like. Because it's like, as much as I want those other things, it's like the only problem I have with the movie is I just wanted more from it. I wanted more out of it. I wanted like it to go.
In what way? Did you want more of the conversation or more of the cat and mouse?
I wanted more of the cat and mouse stuff, but I definitely felt like more of the religious themes like could have been discussed as well, because they were, like you said, they're not necessarily. It's not really a critique or attack on Mormonism. It really has nothing to do with that. Like they could have picked pretty much any religion, honestly. It just so happens to work conveniently with Mormons because they're the ones who will go
out and
because it's like a realistic scenario for them to actually go into someone's house and try to convert them, because that's something that they do. It's part of their practice. So I felt like, but I, at the same time I was like, oh, it'd be interesting to talk more about Mormonism, like specifically, or about like like other religions that are relevant for the film. But I guess that again, but this isn't something I like can hold too strongly against the movie, because like everything it does, it succeeds at doing pretty much.
Yeah. It did.
Yeah. So it's kind of like, what I really want is a sequel, which is weird.
It is weird, especially for a horror film.
Yeah. I almost never want that. Like Descent 2. Go watch our Descent 2 review.
Oh my gosh. Or Ring 2, both.
Or Ring 2, yeah, but terrible. But this, if they had Hugh Grant, I mean, Hugh Grant has to be in it again, so you could do prequel or sequel or however you want to do that. But it would have to be him, and I honestly think it could be interesting. It would need to be, similarly competent people, but I feel like there was more to kind of interrogate there. But maybe I also just need to rewatch it because I only saw it the one time. Maybe if I just watched it a couple more times, that I would, feel more content with it. But
I feel like you and I, one of the things that we share is that we can get quite a bit from a film on one viewing.
Yeah,
and I that doesn't say that it doesn't merit a second viewing, but I think we got most of what we could get from the first viewing, and not just be like we're not special or whatever. It's just like we understood the premise and like hey, that's fair. But like it was, I mean, as they go, the themes of it were fairly straightforward. It wasn't an overly complicated film, but it did have a lot of themes that could be expounded on. I think that was your point, is that
yeah, like, there's one room where there's like a bunch of like satanic stuff everywhere, and I was like, what's this have to do with anything?
Oh yeah, when she's
it's like a hallway that she's walking through. Yeah. And I was like, it was adequately creepy. I'm like, I get it's creepy, but like but maybe I get that answer
because that's the opposite side, right? Is that you have religion and then like anti-religion almost, where you get into Satanism, or they had a lot of images of like Baphomet and all that kind of stuff. Seemed like they were clearly he was going into further detail of how much. Anyway,
but there's like a layer too, because that's like the underbelly, right? That's like fair. The dark, because like the top level is his library, and that's where he's
stuff,
talking about the main religions. But then there's like underneath all of that is this kind of like horrific,
right?
Monstrous stuff
where the prophet shows up, and then below that's all the satanic symbolism. And
yeah.
That's interesting. It'd be interesting to see more of the house and more of what he could bring up or not bring up.
Yeah,
I don't know. Maybe the next one could be like a couple of Satanists come over to try and convince him. That's the sequel. He brings them to God.
He makes them like religion. That'd be so funny.
All right, there's your idea for the sequel.
Yeah.
So what would you rate this film then, as like the critic representative, or do you think that was a pretty generous score?
Yeah, I mean, I'm with the critics on this one. Like 90% is good.
Okay.
4 out of 5 stars.
Okay.
Well, I mean, but I go 5-star. I don't know. Like, it's just because like I do kind of want a little. I can't help but want a little bit more. Like,
which is an interesting factor. Like, how do you determine if that's positive or negative about the film?
Yeah.
Does that mean that it was good enough to want more, or that they just had a shortcoming that you wanted further?
Yeah.
And so, I mean, not sure where that testament lies, but
one sentiment to that, though, that I think is worth mentioning in terms of myself as a critic, many of my favorite movies are you just put them on repeat. Like when they end, it's like I want more from it, so I just start it all over again. Like The Birds, I never watched The Birds once. I watched The Birds twice minimum. Because by the time it ends, the way that it ends is just like so frustrating. I just want more. But I had everything I needed throughout the main movie, so I just started all over again. And I've since been using that as a determiner for like my favorite movies, because I'm like, that's such an interesting. It's like you made me so mad because I was enjoying myself so much, but it's like you're getting the strongest reaction out of me way more than other movies. And those other movies that are going to end in a more satisfying way, like, yeah, I'm satisfied, but like how much is that satisfaction going to last on subsequent viewings? Whereas like if you frustrate me just enough, and it frustrates me to want to go back and re-experience more to see if I missed anything, that's, I think, a real telltale sign that you've really landed something gold. So I'm going to go with 90% or like 4.5 stars for now, but it could change with time. I am going to watch that movie again, though, at some point.
Did you want to watch it right after you left the movie? Like as soon as it ended?
Well, no, I wanted the movie to just be longer, but that's the exact same feeling that I had with The Birds when that movie ended, where I was like, I want this movie to keep going. I don't like that it's stopping right now.
Fair enough.
So it's a similar feeling.
Take that as you will.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'd agree. I'd probably put it at like a 40 or 4 out of 5 star.
Yeah, 40 out of 100.
Yeah, bam. But yeah, I think that would equate to about 90%. I mean, and that's given a couple of factors, because I typically don't enjoy A24 films, and this one was rather worth watching. Hugh Grant, obviously.
I feel like you're also pretty critical of horror movies in general.
Yeah. I mean, as much as one can be critical, because like when you're watching a horror movie, you know what you're getting. You're going into a horror movie. Like, what do you know?
Right.
And so, but I mean,
well, that's what I liked about this one. It's different.
That's fair. But that's why I'm saying it deserved a lot more, just because it wasn't trying to be like a jump scare, gratuitous horror film.
Yeah.
It actually had some interesting themes, and it was using those themes in order to portray this message in this like dark, gritty way.
Yeah.
So I liked it that way, and it was slow enough to where it wasn't like constantly, oh, what's the next scary thing that's going to pop up? Like it was intentionally taking its time in order to portray these themes and allow you to think about them. And I liked that.
Yeah.
And obviously Hugh Grant did a great job in portraying this character appropriately.
Mm-hmm.
And then the two female actresses did a great job in like how they were portraying their characters as well. I think Paxton and Barnes it was commendable performances all around. Yeah. And so, it was just engaging from start to finish. I liked the ending was well done. Yeah. I agree that it could have done with more. I think some of those themes might have been interesting, but at the same time, I think it might be handled pretty well with a prequel and or sequel also. So, I mean, I'm not saying to franchise this thing. Please, for the love of God, don't.
I'm not saying that either.
One other film would be fine.
Yeah. It could do a second for sure.
Yeah. So I think that's what I'd give it. I don't know why. It seemed like when we were reading the audience reviews, because it's a 77 for audience, I think when we were reading them, it seemed like a lot of people had a very strong preconceived notion of what this film should have been, which is weird because it's like, this is an A24 movie. So you'd think that it would be, because it seemed like a lot of like common horror movie fans that went and saw this.
Yeah, they were just like, oh, it wasn't scary enough, or there wasn't like,
like, this is pretentious, and it's trying like didn't know what it was trying to be, and it was like
too many thoughts. It's like, who cares?
Thought too much about this movie. Yeah, to me it was like, this is an A24 film. Like, it's pretty standard for these things to deviate off of the norm. So I'm not sure what you were expecting, but okay, sure. And most of them didn't seem like very well thought out.
And the pie eating scene? Did you just miss that?
Did you miss that? That saved the movie, right? Forget Hugh Grant. The pie eating scene, that's where it's at. That was the best part. To be fair, it was the most entertaining part. But like it was, I was just like, my gosh, like, jeez, so much.
Yeah. So here's, I'm gonna say it because I'm curious if this will happen, but I want to know right now, which I won't be able to know for a couple of months, but I want to know if this movie shows up at the Oscars at all.
No.
And
I think Hugh, if anything else, will get Best Actor.
Get a nomination for it?
I think so.
You think he will? I'm not gonna lie. I think he might. I think he might show up there. But I mean, his performance was incredible, and they might be like, "Hey, like Hugh's been around a really long time. Like he's never has he even been nominated?
I don't know.
I don't think he's ever been nominated.
This is your world. I have no idea. I'm just saying that was a Oscar-worthy performance.
Absolutely, yeah. So I could definitely see him being nominated for sure.
I suppose cinematography could possibly make it. It's a good-looking film. It's not like stellar, but it's a good-looking movie.
Yeah, I mean, so like if it's just narrowed down to like Hugh Grant, I think that one's like the most secure. But if it branches outside of that and gets more attention, I think that would be really fascinating. And I guess I bring that up because if it gets a bunch of nominations, it's going to make me wonder about whether or not there was something more to the movie that I'm like missing and I just need to watch it again. Because my thinking is that they will kind of not be too interested in like the script and the movie as a whole, apart from Grant, just because it didn't like kind of investigate enough about like Mormonism specifically.
Yeah, it wasn't too pointed. It was very kind of
it doesn't quite
broader point.
Tap into like the social consciousness in the way that's super obvious. I would argue that it is though, because there's a lot of conflict right now about people getting their beliefs questioned and the kind of knee-jerk reaction that everybody goes through.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to get into it, but, we just had an election cycle, and there's a lot of people really disenfranchised and confused over why that happened. And,
deconstruction is also a big thing. It has been over the last couple of years of just making sure that you're critically thinking about your faith or your belief system. And,
right.
Hugh Grant
or the
goes
information
in a
that
different
you have,
Right.
right?
But Hugh Grant's point is, it's very self-serving, whereas, it's serving just him. He's got a broad question or broad point about religion in general, but he applies it to himself.
Yeah.
Rather than applying it to specific religions or, challenging religion in general, he just uses it to his own benefit.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, I guess on a broader narrative, like, it's harder to apply that point.
But the subject of that interrogation, I think, does apply. And I'm curious if the Oscars will pick up on that. Because I almost feel like, I think it's more likely that for them to pick up on it, like, 5 years from now with another movie that kind of does similarly of talking about this issue of, like, people just being really, like,
maybe
thinking that they're so confirmed on what they believe and why, and then, like, reality hits them and they go, wait a minute, how does that, I didn't see that coming. It's like, well, you didn't see it coming
because you weren't looking for it.
Basically, it's like you saw what you wanted to see.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And so I don't know, and we have AI, which is doing all kinds of chaos too. So there's just things going on in our world that I think are pertinent enough to do a discussion. And this movie is talking about them, but I'm kind of stretching it just a little bit because I don't think the movie itself was, like, let's talk about a social issue. Sure. I don't think that was their intent whatsoever.
Right.
I think they were way more interested just in the idea they'd come up with. It just so happens that the idea links up with it. So all that to say, if it got nominated for Best Picture, I think I would get it. I'd be like, yeah, that I could see that now. I think it would be a surprise. I don't think it will, but it's been kind of a weak year. I'm not sure what else they're going to go with.
Too.
Well, apart from that. No, I mean, you're right. Dune 2 was great.
Yeah.
What else?
They
have 10 slots.
I'd have to look through the list. I don't know. I don't remember all the things that have come out this year as opposed to last. I was going to say Batman, but I think that was last year, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was last year.
Yeah, exactly. So
they got Dune 2, and they also have Dune 2. That was an option.
Yeah.
But that's about it.
Denis did one.
Dune.
He did. It was
so that's
based
right.
on that book.
Oh, that's right. That was a good movie.
Great movie. Anyway.
Yeah.
So those have been our thoughts on Heretic, the recent A24 film. Do you have any further thoughts that you'd like to delve into?
I'm good.
No. A+.
But you know what I would like?
2 thumbs away up.
How about that pie?
Pie. Let's go get some pie.